there's always a lot of pressure of like having a very strong voice, but then you're working with trauma, so it's a lot of vulnerability included.
I'm Jarosz, this is iksvy Art Talks, and today's guest is
Anna Jarosz.
Thank you for coming today. It's going to be interesting to having you on the podcast for me.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to speak to you on this podcast, of course.
Thank you. I wish we could actually record our previous conversations about like art and life in general, because I think they were interesting in a different level.
Mm-hmm.
But now I want to learn more about you and your art in particular. So tell me how you define your artwork.
Wow, that's a very interesting first question. I don't know how to answer it in just few words, but I think I'm trying to build, because I mostly work with installation right now. I have background in photography and video, but I'm trying to create spaces and take over spaces by putting sculptural objects into mostly gallery spaces. I haven't been working so much outside. But yeah, I think that's the most important part of it, just to, take over the space in a way.
You said you have background in video and photography, but you also have a background in music, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true.
So how did you make this mix matching and ended up in installation?
Well, actually, I started to study music when I was really young, as a child. I was playing cello and piano.
Oh, wow.
And I did some contemporary dancing as well, which is interesting.
Seriously?
Yeah. Well, someone recently told me that it's a very well-kept secret because I usually don't talk about it. Because I stopped because I did sports.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of sacrificed the music education for sports, which is really funny because I don't do any sports right now. But it definitely gave me this, understanding, but also like it opened me up for new, like experimenting with new media, you know, because when I started studying photography, I was really focused on it, and I thought that's the only thing I can do because I was never really that good at drawing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, art, when you're like 15, art is like drawing and painting.
Yeah.
So I thought photography is my medium, but then soon I realized that it's quite flat, and I just wanted to kind of escape this pictures on the wall. Like, of course, photography can be much more, but I think for me at some point it was just not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I was interested in this like three-dimensionality of sculptural objects and site-specific installations mostly.
And how did you realize that it was flat for you?
I just got stuck,
Mm-hmm.
you know? I was experimenting in different types of photography. I worked a lot in darkroom because like digital photography was a bit boring. Mm-hmm. And then I was just like making, like I was installing photography in spaces in a very sculptural way, like not really hanging them on the walls, but trying to move them a little bit around. And then I just discovered that I can actually do sculpture and I can experiment with materials, and that's fine. So that's how it goes.
And was it a smooth transition for you? Was it available to transform your work from photography to sculpture all of a sudden?
No, it was actually a battle because I'm self-taught in sculpture. I never had a teacher. You know, I was studying, when I moved to Sweden, I was still studying photography, but it was a fine arts education. So there were a lot of workshops available and a lot of people to actually expand the conversation on not only photography, but like arts in general. So then I just locked myself in sculpting studios, and I was pretty much experimenting a lot with different materials and trying to make something out of it. And it was really slow. It was a really slow process. But now I don't really do photography anymore.
And in terms of like being connected with a certain medium, how did you feel when you were like having this slow transition? Because you still had to keep your photography lessons, I assume, at the university, and also practice what you wanted to practice. Did you feel like you were cheating on one of the other or something like that?
Yeah, definitely. But it was also on the master's level in Sweden, you don't really have any classes. It's mostly based on your own project that you develop throughout the 2 years. So I was really hitting the wall a lot, because on one level I had all the professors who were really specific about the photography education. Was really media oriented, but at the same I was trying to do it. I was really trying to force myself, because I felt it's I'm somehow obliged to use photography, but I just couldn't, because I felt like the project that I was working on was not photography wasn't suitable. I also did a lot of video work previously, so that was already I think that was the first step of me moving away from still photography, and then it just went quite naturally.
Okay. And was there an expectation from the public, because you're already doing your masters, which means, to me at least, you have some background, some people who are already supporting your photos, liking them, and wants to endorse your art in a way. Did you get any backlash from a certain crowd, or was it always supportive?
Well, at the beginning I felt a lot of pressure from the group as well, because most of the people that I was surrounded by were working quite strictly with photography in one way or another. There was always a lot of photography surrounding me, so it was pretty inspiring to see the work of people there. But I think I just got, after 1 year, they accepted that I'm just a little bit different in the way of working. So that was, it was actually nice, because I could see myself as part of this photography degree because of my background and because of the way I think about my work. It always somehow starts with this still image, but then the result is more three-dimensional in space.
That's an interesting point, starting with photography, because anything art or installation related in general ends up in photography, just to document it at least. So do you think that kind of gives you a leverage when it comes to documenting your artwork in the end?
For sure. I mean, the skills that I've gained during studying photography for so long definitely help to capture the work in a way, but I'm never really satisfied with the effect. Yeah, I'm never satisfied with the documentation that I do, even though I try really hard to capture the feeling of the actual artwork. But at the same time, I work a lot with lights and often with sound as well, which is obviously impossible to capture in still photography. So, and I'm also quite interested in the way that the people that encounter the work, how they behave in the space and how they can go around it. And I think that's the whole point of doing also the spatial installations in a way. And you cannot get this feeling when you just look at the photographs. So sometimes I try to capture the work with people in the space, so you can get a little bit of the hint of how it might feel like, but it's definitely quite hard.
Yeah, I understand totally what you're talking about, because I saw your exhibition just a couple days ago, and I also familiarized myself with your artwork on your website, at least with the ones that you have there, and I can totally understand based on from my own experience as well, because if you're working with the ambient and everything like that, then it's very difficult to recreate that moment in a different dimension, whether it be 2-dimension or 3-dimension, like something like a virtual exhibition. I don't get the same feeling, but I think that's also what makes your artwork very personal, because it's one-time feeling, one-time experience. Even if you take the same artwork and install it in a different setting, it's not going to be the same. And of course, your visitors are not going to be same, which makes this very individual. And I think it's very, in a way, it's very ironic when I consider the concept that you're working on. It's how would you actually describe that? I'll leave that to you.
The concept of what I'm working around. Well, I've been working around the trauma for the past 5 years, I would say, and trauma in a very personal on the very personal level, but also trauma as a collective experience of a group of people. And also I work a lot with the idea of body and abjection, and I'm trying to combine these feelings somehow, these concepts, and then the outcome is the installation that both sort of touches upon your physical presence in the space. That's why it's quite important that coming back again to this like importance of people's presence within the artwork, but also the feeling that you have. And that's why I'm interested in taking over and sort of like recreating, or maybe not recreating, but like, yeah, just taking over the gallery spaces and not only gallery, but just spaces that I'm exhibiting in particular. But it was also interesting that you talked about virtual exhibitions, because I actually did one. I don't know if you've seen it, but during the lockdown, we were planning to make an exhibition with a sound artist that I'm collaborating with, Agata Lewandowski. And we were really excited about making it for a couple of months. And then, like, of course, we couldn't do it because everything was closed. So the gallery offered us to do it online. And that was a very big challenge, thinking of the way we usually work. But we did it. And it was a video work that was somehow like engaging the viewers to do something. But mostly it was just taking over the screen again. So it was a very interesting experience to somehow transform this way of working in space to the virtual space.
I get it. And how do you feel about not seeing your audience?
Yeah, that's the tricky one. But I guess you don't always see the audience when you do the exhibitions, because you're not always physically present there. But it was also interesting when you do it online, because people somehow feel that they need to react in a way. Or there was like part of the installation was that you could actually email us about your feelings, or like how you saw the exhibition, how you experienced it in a way.
And people did that?
Yeah, people did it a lot.
Wow.
Which was interesting. I did not expect that much engagement from the audience. I think it was even more than you would usually hear, because maybe people are a little bit scared to approach you when you're actually in the space.
Exactly. But do you think that's because you're working on something very personal, even though it's collective trauma, but you're working about like basically being human, like the trauma of being born? And of course we don't remember it, but everybody experienced this in their own way. Do you think this is one of the reasons why people are having a hard time to approach to you in the physical space?
It might be. But I think it's general, like, human reaction to somehow confronting the person who made the artwork, because you always question your own experience. I think especially with this kind of work that I'm making, it's very ambiguous in a way. You feel it, but you may be not sure what you think and what are you supposed to think and what you're supposed to feel. So there's always this uncertainty, I feel, of like talking to the actual person who made it and then confronting your own feeling about it.
And when you're not in person, you don't have the same judgmental fear, the fear of being judged, I guess. But do you think that's in general, or it might also depend on the topic of the exhibition or where you are at that moment?
Yeah, definitely. Both, I think. Because then referring to the online exhibition, again, I feel like when you're hiding somehow on the other side of the screen, you're a little bit anonymous in a way. Like, even though, of course, like you can see who that is that's actually emailing you, but still, like you somehow have this shell of not being able to see the person. So it's a little bit of a distance, as you mentioned. But then, like, again, the space when, like, coming back to the physical exhibition, the space where it's happening and how many people are there and who the artist is, you know, like, people are different. You always get a different relation depending on somehow, like, this nonverbal communication.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of different things that affect the way you approach.
And when you think about your previous exhibitions with like photography as a medium and what you're doing now, what's the difference when you consider the public?
Oh, that's a very hard one. It's also different because when I was working with photography, I was not exhibiting so much as I'm exhibiting right now. So I was not really reaching out to so many people. But I feel like the discussion about the artwork is very different when it comes to photography, because I feel like photography is still somehow living in this preconception or misconception, or like constantly question itself as a medium, you know?
Yeah.
On this very basic level that we started to have this conversation, you know, when the photography was invented. Is it art or is it just, you know, recording the reality? And it's been a question throughout the whole time that I've been studying photography. Like, it's always somehow coming back, no matter if you read like texts from like mid 20th century or contemporary texts on photography. It's always this matter of uncertainty. And I think when we talk about painting or sculpture, is so well established somehow in the art world that, like, you wouldn't question if a sculpture is art, right? Because it somehow goes. So yeah, I think that's the main...
I guess it's older and probably one of the main reasons why it's established that way. But do you think when people are interpreting your artwork or when they're trying to understand, do you think they're more comfortable with photography or with installations?
And then again, it depends where you are and what's the what's the background of the discussion. Because when I was studying in Sweden, it was always somehow, my work was always discussed through the photography filter because of the context, right? But then when you go and just exhibit somewhere, like I had the exhibition here in Belgrade, people don't necessarily know your background, of course. So I think this discussion somehow goes a little bit away.
Okay. And you said something about that you didn't exhibit as much as when you were doing photography. Was that a conscious decision or it was just coincidental?
Well, it was mostly because I was just at the very beginning of my art path, as you would say.
Okay.
Because when I was doing photography, or let's say when I started to study, I was studying in Prague, and I was just, still learning and still somehow at the very beginning. And now I'm, getting more involved in the art scene. So there are more possibilities to exhibit and to show the work.
Okay, I understand. I was thinking maybe if you're more comfortable now with this medium and then you're pushing it a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. But I feel like I'm generally more comfortable with myself as an artist. Because simply I just grew to it throughout the few years of experience, and I just learned how to do things and how to approach, for example, galleries or how to speak about my work. And I'm definitely more confident in what I do right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think it's partially to do with because you had to do everything yourself, learn everything by yourself, and it made it a little bit more personal than a medium like photography that is a little bit more like clean cut and has its own frames, literally. But when it comes to the topics you're working on, like, did it start when you were doing photography, or is this something that evolved with like working with installation?
When I started to work around the trauma, that was the first moment when I decided that photography is not enough to express what I want to say, actually. Because, I was in the studio where a lot of people were working with very different mediums. Actually, in Prague, it was a studio, like it was the cathedral of photography, but there were people were rarely working with photography, and that kind of opened me up a lot and showed me the possibility of like going around the medium a little bit, still somehow spinning around photography, like still photography, but also like expanding. So I started to just work with video and with sound, and I also worked a lot with text. And that was, I think, the first step of somehow moving a little bit further. Yeah.
Okay. And what made you interested in this subject?
Actually, I started with my own experience because I got somehow stuck during my second year of studies, and I was really just walking in circles. And I think that was also this photography cage that I put myself in, because I really genuinely believe that photography is the only thing I can do, that I have absolutely no other skills. So I was really like walking around, but they're just not giving the results. I just couldn't see the work that I've been producing as something that is valuable for other people. To escape this kind of sentimental value that photography has quite strongly. And then I was just having this long conversation with one of my professors, and he was telling me that maybe I should actually use myself as a subject to at least to start something and then move away from it. So that's what I did. And I used this experience, very traumatic experience of being attacked on the street, like one day when I was coming home, and I was like really escaping that. But at some point I just decided to confront it. And that was the beginning of it. But then as doing a lot of research on it and how trauma is affecting nearly everyone, but in a very different way, I decided to move my own experience a little bit away, still basing on it, but move it a little bit away. And then I just continue working with it, because I could really see that there is a lot of potential in it, and there is a lot of things to explore and talk about. And then the collectivity of trauma came with my fascination with this phenomena of dancing mania. I don't know if you heard about that.
I heard it from you.
Oh yeah, true. We spoke about it. So I was really interested in this collective experience of some really difficult subjects and difficult just problems that people have, but they don't really know how to speak about it. But then they were dancing, so they were using their bodies to somehow connect with each other. So that I found really somehow revealing.
Okay, so if you allow me to go back to that trauma, the personal trauma you had, being attacked on the street, did it help? Like using yourself as the subject, as the starting point, did it help to cope with that?
In some way, or I would say more, I had to cope with it in order to use it for my art.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so I was, I think it was a year after the event actually happened, and I was always refusing to go to that part of the town. And that conversation that I had with my professor, he suggested that I should just go there, confront it, and see what happens. And that's exactly what I did. It was horrible, but at the same time, I understood that it's not impossible, and it could be really meaningful and valuable to actually transform it into something. But at the same time, it's a curse, because every time I speak about that, and I speak about them, the beginning of my interest in trauma, people always, or not always, but a lot of people have this misconception of me, using my practice as self-healing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's looked from above, it's like, oh, you shouldn't do that.
No, why? Even if so, why?
Well, because you should talk about more general things, I guess, instead of, like I heard a lot of people somehow connected to the art world being like, it shouldn't be like art is not therapy. Maybe you need a therapist first. So it's like, I can see a lot of this, like working around trauma, it's very challenging in terms of people often judging you for using this experience as a drive in a way, which I believe I'm not doing, but still, it's a lot of these discussions actually around my work.
It's literally mind-blowing to me that people can be judging this, even if you are using as self-healing. Like, I don't think there's something wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you're like focusing on any topic, you're focusing on for a certain personal reason, and why not your trauma, and why not get something out of it, even if you're not doing it? Like, yeah, I just can't imagine people judging this, and I feel like that's like a very pretentious approach towards art, also mental health. And it's just shouldn't be there like that. Like, if like we're talking about art, like these people are supposed to be the ones who are open-minded, and I think it's just so idiotic that this is how they are. It's a little bit mind-numbing for me at the moment.
Yeah, but I feel like a lot of subjects that I'm touching upon in my practice are these, like, not necessarily taboos, but things that are a bit triggering for certain people. Like, I work with trauma. I work with, like, within feminist subjects. And that's another thing that it's like, it was a little bit of a curse while studying at the academy. Because, especially from, like, female professors, I felt that there's always a lot of pressure of, like, having a very strong voice, but then you're working with trauma, so it's a lot of vulnerability included. So that's a lot of these discussions that you constantly have, and you're constantly trying to distance yourself from that, but maybe you shouldn't do that. So it's quite tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine. This is the thing though, like, if we're trying to be advocate of something like feminism, we kind of have to start from a personal point. To actually generalize this and make it understandable for other people. And I do understand the pressure, but people are also have to, like, think that, like, we need to be approaching this from different zones, because your experience with feminism is not going to be the same as someone else's. Nor them, like, because, like, there's the age difference, and there's the cultural background that goes into that. What you would be perceiving as feminism wouldn't be the same as theirs. And how do you, like, when we talk about the feminism, how do you reflect that on the trauma portion of your work?
Well, I actually speak a lot about this gender trauma, and partially, again, like, coming back to my own experience, because I feel like I cannot refer to, like, at this point, I cannot refer to any kind of trauma that I have not experienced myself in a way, because I don't feel confident enough and knowledgeable enough to talk about it. But, like, I try to speak about trauma as a very general experience, as we spoke before about, like, something that touches, like, literally everyone. But at the same time, I'm interested in this, like, specific notion of trauma that is experienced, like, based on the gender as well.
I think that's also, like, pretty much every female can also relate to. And, like, is it because your experience with this attack was based on your gender, or, like, something else?
I feel like that was the beginning, but maybe not anymore. Because I'm interested in, like, the sensation of gender and the discussion on gender in general. Or I come from Poland, and there is a lot of discussion on, for example, the rights of, like, LGBT people, and it's just so exhausting to to watch it and to think about it. And there's so much trauma that I can also see that's related to it on both sides, you know? So I find it quite fascinating and problematic at the same time. So I think it's really important to speak up about it and to somehow transform it into the practice that I do.
Okay. And when it comes to transferring this into your work, I know that your artwork is not preachy. Like, you're not trying to change someone else's mind. You're not trying to influence them in a way that is like black and white, let's say. But how do you think people, or like, what do you think people will be getting out of getting from your work?
I think I can't really predict that to an extent. It's always quite difficult to...
Of course.
Yeah, maybe the most difficult, actually. I definitely try to, because of the way I work in space and often using lighting to create a more intimate space for people to experience the pieces that I put there, and also using sound often. So I create this like little spaces that you can somehow get lost in a little bit. But also I'm interested in making the viewer feel uncomfortable, just because of the nature of the subject that I'm working with. So, and this like confronting yourself in the space as well as making the person who comes into the room, to make them feel both uncomfortable, also like part of the work in a way. For example, like the exhibition that you saw the other day here, I was really interested in transforming the space in the way that the visitors actually become part of the work, but also they reshape the work based on their movement inside the space and their own like physical presence there.
Okay. Then what is your observations? Like, what do you think it changed for the viewer? Not necessarily just here, but in general, the work you do, and how do you think people transformed?
Like themselves? Again, it depends on, like, you know, it's very difficult because people approach art
Differently and
in a very, very different way. Some people would never enter the space and they would just have this experience of being outside in front of the work, looking at it from the outer perspective. And then again, it depends if there are other people in the space that are inside or if they're alone. And I think it's a very big difference on how you see it. But I had so many different feedbacks from people regarding the exhibitions that I've made before. Some people get uncomfortable, some people get scared and they don't want to enter because it's a bit too much for them. Yes.
That's interesting.
And some people, or once I heard that it was like a very sad experience of being there because they could actually refer. It was an installation that combined like a few sculptures, sound and voiceover. So it was like a monologue, and someone could really relate to that monologue. So it was like, for them, it was really quite powerful. But I think it really, in the way I work, it really depends on like your own experience and how you kind of position yourself within the space.
Yeah, in that case, can you say that you're not making your artwork with a certain emotion in mind?
Well, there is definitely a bunch of emotions, or like the whole, a whole bunch of emotions.
But it's not like I'm making this piece to make people feel angry and this piece to make them feel sad.
No.
Okay.
But generally, I don't think I have this approach of like wanting to make people feel in a very particular way.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty open with this. Like, of course, it's definitely not gonna be a happiness because it's just or maybe it could be, but it could be, but that would be a bit strange.
No, but think about it. If they were traumatized in a certain way, and if they can relate to the piece, maybe they just like made their peace with their past, and that's why it's a pleasing experience for them.
Yeah, well, okay. That could be it.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask, since you're doing collective trauma of being born, everybody experiences, nobody remembers, but there's also this very traditional thinking when it comes to giving birth or being born. It's this beautiful experience that no one can describe. You can only live this. Do you think the way you work and your work in general goes against this and kind of like creates this narrative that it might not be?
Well, I think it's a very personal experience, and I'm definitely not denying anyone the right to feel happy and like to talk about giving birth as a sacred experience. I understand that, and it's definitely there. But what I'm talking about is more this like trauma of separation.
Okay.
As like drawing on Julia Kristeva and her theory of abject, and the separation of like oneself and the other in the context of separation of the mother and the child, more in that context than the actual event of being born, I think.
Okay, I understand. I think I was more thinking like there's this beautified image of giving birth or being born, but people are also disregarding women who are experiencing something completely opposite, and they can't really talk about this in a lot of places. Like there's not a lot of safe space to talk about the negative experience of it. And I was thinking like maybe it can also connect with that, but I understand what you mean.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true what you're talking about, and I think it happens more than we actually think it does, and it happens more, although we don't talk about it. But yeah, I think that's a little bit of a different topic in that context.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to separation anxiety, which is what the being born creates, do you think you as a person or your work is exploring separation anxiety throughout life, or just like limits with a certain period of time?
I feel like the starting point is the separation of oneself and the other, but still like within yourself. In this like very philosophical matter of speaking about things. But again, it could be both, but on a very different level, if you know what I mean. So it depends, because I usually I try to narrow each exhibition or each like project that I'm working on is a little bit like focused on a different thing. For example, now I was working with the notion of superstition in like within the society and within the both like Polish and Serbian cultures, and somehow trying to connect it to the experience of collective trauma and trauma in general. But then like the last exhibition I did in Reykjavik was like very kind of personal, and it was like very focused on like the gendered experience of trauma. So I think it really depends on like each work is touching a little bit upon something different.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
And now, like if I have to generalize it, you are in a turmoil for your life and for your art, because you just graduated from your master's degree. You're here to do like a short residency in Belgrade, and then you're moving to Portugal. What is the thing that you feel most pressured with?
Right now?
Right now is probably my question, but in general, in this perspective.
The most pressured with? That's like a big one. Well, I'm not sure, because the last months were so insane in a way, and like on so many different levels.
Yeah.
That it's really hard to focus on what's actually happening, because everything is going somehow so fast, but also unpredictable. Everything is very unpredictable. or like on one hand, everyone is talking a lot about stopping and like pausing things, but at the same time, everything goes extremely fast.
Exactly.
So it's a very difficult one to answer at this point. But I feel like I'm a little bit in the stage of being in between, of closing one, like, definitely important chapter of also living in Sweden and doing my master's there and starting something new. But the something new is not necessarily something that I know of yet. I think it's somewhere there in the horizon, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. But yeah, I recently spent a month in a quarry, and I was working on stone. And, you know, stone sculpting is a very slow process. So it was a very big opposition of how I usually work, because I usually work very fast, because I'm quite impatient. So like all the materials that I was working with before were like, you know, pretty, like I could control them quite well, and I learned how to handle them. But then with stone, again, it was like so slow and so clumsy in a way, because you really don't know what you're doing. So I think that is like somehow, it could be somehow connected to this like stage of life that I'm experiencing right now, being like a little bit clumsy, a little bit like, you know, just waiting for another thing and another day to come to actually see what it's going to bring. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it actually does, because I might be asking this question because I also feel similar. Like, it's a very unpredictable situation for all of us, to be honest, given the world's situation, but from a personal point as well. And I was curious if it helps with the anxiety of not knowing that everybody is in the same situation.
Well, definitely, and that's like referring also to the collectivity of experiencing the trauma, right? That it comforts you if you know that you're not the only one.
Exactly.
That is somehow stuck and somehow just in this huge trouble of not being able to plan everything. And we are so used to being somehow trapped in this plan of like always
controlling.
Yeah, of always like following certain, like, okay, you have the next step and the next step, and then like you just like following this path, but then like you don't really know what's going to happen next week or even tomorrow.
Exactly.
So that is really, but I somehow feel that people are getting used to this and going along with it in a way. What do you think?
I agree, and I think I'm also getting used to it. It doesn't mean that I'm happy with it, but I can't actually do anything to change it. But on the other hand, I also don't necessarily like myself when I'm over controlling and planning too far ahead. So it kind of gives me some sort of comfort knowing that this is out of my hands. Doesn't matter what I do, I can't really change it. So yeah, I think I'm getting used to it, but I don't know until when. I can't say that I'm like fully confronted with this situation and I feel comfortable around it. There are definitely days that I'm freaking out, and there are days that I'm feeling like, okay, it's actually good to be a little bit like a step back and think about some stuff. So there's this constant fluctuation for me.
Yeah, I think we're just all extremely traumatized now.
We are, and that's gonna give you more subjects to work with.
I don't think there is like a need for more trauma in the world right now.
I don't think that's something that we can prevent, to be honest. As long as we're alive, we're going to be exposed to this one way or another. If it's not through our own mind and body, we're going to witness someone else's trauma, and that's going to affect us in one way or another.
Yeah, definitely. That's like that's exactly why I feel it's so important to talk about it, besides self-healing and the idea of using yourself somehow as a subject, but also like observing how other people's trauma is affecting you. But also that is another subject or another like arm of the the trauma that I was thinking about and touching upon somehow in my work is that this idea of trauma being inherited, or how we actually, when we are born, we're already traumatized, but not in this like separation level, but also because we are given this trauma from our mothers and our grandmothers, and like how this very particular personal trauma is traveling throughout the generations, and it somehow never leaves you because you're so exposed to it in a very indirect level.
And it's part of you, essentially.
Yeah. And it becomes like also, it starts to affect the way you look at the world. Therefore, you also transmit this to other people. And it's like this never-ending circle of this like trauma just being there on very different levels, because there's different types of trauma that people experience, and of course we have to take that into consideration when we speak about it. But I think definitely it's something that everyone can relate to in some way.
I agree, and I think it's good to start to talk about this at one point. Even like just knowing there are different type of traumas and there are different ways to deal with it is actually helpful. So thank you for coming to record this episode, and thank you for your work, because I think you're still changing something.
Oh, thank you. It was really nice to talk to you.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to support or collaborate, you can contact us at info@iksvy.com or via social media. The music in this episode was created by Vlad Kujuklu, a Moldovan musician living in New York. iksvy Art Talks is brought to you by iksvy Art, an initiative focused on supporting the arts in Eastern Europe.